Um, how did you navigate applying your experience as EOD to and relate to positions in the logistics? There are a
Okay.
number of individuals that are looking to pivot
Mhm.
into a different career away from maybe something that's obviously not maybe on the outside, kind of like 11 Bravo infantry to something that's tangible on the outside. How did you make that connection and tell that story to relate?
Right. So, I mean, really, it boils down to taking the specifics of whatever classification that you trained in, and really boiling it down into what does the company do. So, fun fact: when I looked at the director of operations role with the recruiter, I didn't even know what company it was. I had no clue that it was a logistics company or anything like that. It was really the I didn't get into that until I was actually talking with the chief operations officer of that company, and he kind of explained to it a little bit. So right off the bat, I didn't really have any prep for that. But what I did have is, I'm sure you guys have done some mock interviews, and the guys will do that through the programs where you're quite a kind of equating, so like a team business where, obviously we all ran teams. We all had deadlines. We all had to show up on time. We all had those, just those skills of the military that we've been taught throughout our career that really apply to like anybody going into a first time job or any of that nature. You got to show up on time. You got to be courteous to whoever maybe under your employment at whatever level of team you're in. You have to be able to, react when something happens. Like you have to have some type of interpersonal conflict management training that you've had to where you've had to like, kind of calm a situation down or do any things like that. All those things relate to the civilian workforce as well. Obviously, there's an HR department, which, HR is not really prevalent in the military that much because you're all following orders or doing things like that. But, you know, there there is a lot of difference in the civilian world when it comes to standard operating procedures. There's SOPs, there's training that has to be done, there's HR training that has to be done, manager training. Like a lot of the big companies or the companies that you may want to go into, they have a lot of those leadership things that are kind of built within that company that you'll go through as well, so that will help the transition. But as far as those examples, it's just taking stories from your own career and applying those into those questions. Like, tell me about a time that you had this, or this happened with an employee or a teammate. How did you de-escalate the situation? How did you accomplish the mission when something came up, whether it was a flat tire, whether you didn't get the right equipment at the right time, but you had to improvise. And then just being able to speak effectively and be able to answer the question and be honest. That was my biggest thing, is honesty. Like the reason that I went with this company was for the people and the culture. They have an amazing culture. They did talk about that when I was in the interview. I went up to the company, looked at it, and face to face, and you see it. And that's the biggest thing I could kind of say is, like, when you are choosing a company, you want to do some research. You want to make sure that you look at it, and you want to try to get in there and be like, meet the people, because the people in the company will tell you the truth, and you can kind of see it. Fun fact: I was going to do a skill bridge with Home Depot. I got in right before the deadline, and it was like last minute. I went in and talked to a couple of different um, people at the managers at the warehouse, and what they described to me was chaos. And that was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard in a kind of a pre-interview. It was like, this place is like chaos. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been in some chaos. I can understand that piece for sure. I can definitely relate to that. So it's, finding those things that relate to what you've experienced, to what they may be looking for. And you may not be the right fit. And that's okay. But at least, make the connections and, ask for those type of connections within those circles. And I think that helps a lot, if that answers the question.
No, it does, and that's great. So obviously, one of the things that you have to navigate, spending 32 years in the military and the Navy, we're institutionalized to a very, maybe regimen, very way of speaking to each other and communicating across different departments and stuff like that. Did you find when you exited, when you joined FST, did you find a language barrier when you first got out and started working with them, especially first man on the ground? at an organization. Was there any hurdles that you had to overcome during that process, that initial entry?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Like a lot of the logistics terminology, that they have a lot of acronyms of logistics. Google was my friend. There was also some people within the organization that also sent me some kind of handbooks on, basic warehousing 101, where you can get different books, like and you can even find it. Like I read a couple of business books on P&L and some other stuff like that, as I was prepping for the roles anyway, that you should probably, if you're looking into a certain terminology, you definitely want to get into, some of those different terms and things. But until you get industry specific, you can't really do anything. And then obviously industry is, speaking their language a little bit, but also being able to, admit your own like inexperience and be like, hey, I really don't know. Can you at least lay that in for me so I can take it? It's going to take some work on your end, obviously, if you're moving into a different industry as well. A little extra effort I had to take, a little bit extra reading here and there, as a perfect example is like FTL is a full truckload, less than truckload, all these different types of terms and logistics things that, you know, I'd never heard of, all I'd ever known of is, Amazon and, just the bigger things that as a customer, I didn't have any idea of, those big warehouse things that are littered all over every city's roads and what they actually do inside them. So that was kind of definitely a learning experience on mine, but the information's out there. It's just got to ask the questions and be willing to put in a little bit of extra work that we've all done anyway, studying for the next exam or, the next tool that comes out that you want to master, it's all those same skills apply.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously being in the military, we're very adept to understanding acronyms as a way of life. Especially obviously we speak at Navy very well and understand those acronyms quite well as well. But now that you're obviously 9 months on now, and you were the first person on the ground when they were constructing this warehouse, and you've been able to onboard new employees through the process. What information that you've seen when you're, through the hiring process, through the onboarding process, can be some of the pitfalls for people joining an organization for the first time or applying for an organization for that initial career?
Well, I think, yeah, so it's great because I did hire most of the employees that are working here today. So I have about a 40 personnel staff right now, from an operations manager to a couple of supervisors. And then obviously I have floor, I have customer service, IT, almost, if you look at it, kind of the same thing you would deal with in the military setup in the different encodes, really kind of the same things. But you do have, obviously when you're hiring from this level, you're looking at, the same thing you would look in the military, when you're applying for a team leader job or any of those other types of jobs that you want to move into. You're looking at, my biggest thing is the people and the culture. So just asking basic questions. What's your drive? What kind of experience have you had? And obviously, if we're hiring for this warehouse, you want to have some experience, but all those are usually included in job duties that are already written within that company. They have kind of a list of what they want, kind of like they do with our advancement exams. You have to do this, this, and this, have this experience here. These are the kind of the qualities we're looking for. And, obviously with a company that values culture, much like the military did. And I can speak from, like the EOD community, that's one of the reasons I stayed in so long, was I found the right people and the right culture. That was really important to me. So this company aligned with my values, and even looking into the people that we hire, it's the same kind of values. What drives them, what do they like to give back to the community? There's all these sorts of questions that you can just get into, and then obviously ultimately it comes down to taking a chance with a person, and then obviously holding people accountable to their jobs and their roles as they go, because obviously companies want to protect their bottom line and protect their profitability and make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do for the mission and for the profitability and just the operation. So all of those things factor into it. So it was a little bit different for me just because of, again, didn't really necessarily have the experience, but my company gave me the tools. And also in my interview, I also had my executive vice president sitting in with me as we interviewed people as well to make sure that if there was something that I missed, he didn't miss. So we worked as a team, and that really helps because you're not in it alone. You're not doing any of this alone anymore. You do have a company that, you know, obviously brought you on to do a certain job, and they want to make sure you succeed, but you also want to make sure that you give them everything that you can to help them succeed as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, right? Obviously, kind of what kind of led you to go with FST Logistics in the first place was the company culture,
Mhm.
right? You mentioned the company culture when you were speaking earlier. How important was that? Obviously leaving the military, which has a huge culture in it. How important that when you were looking at the opportunities that were kind of out there and applying, was that kind of a focal point when you were applying for jobs? Was company culture and understanding what that looked like?
It was. That was the people and culture were probably my number one thing. And I got really fortunate. So I didn't mention this before. So FST Logistics is also an ESOP, which is an employee owned company. So every employee is pretty much an owner in the, or has a value of shares based on how long they've been working for the company and things like that. So that really struck at me because, with that type of mindset, people that are here as owners, and to see the company's profitability shoot up directly affects them and their bottom line as they go. It's not just run by the corporate, or it's publicly traded or anything like that. So that was another benefit that I didn't even know about until after I'd had the first interview, which again, that kind of breeds the accountability. If people are, have a vested stake in the company, then showing up every day is kind of a thing. And the other big thing for FST was the turnover. Like when you're researching companies, take a look at what their turnover is for, their employee base, which you can find on some of the different websites and things. And the one thing that struck me about FST is their turnover was very low. They had their average, they have 600 employees, and out of the average of those employees, most of them have worked in the company for over 10 years,
Oh, wow.
which, speaks volumes, right? That's another thing that I didn't get taught when I was researching companies before is, looking at exactly that turnover, or, and reading the reviews, because you can read the reviews all day long, but um, until you actually get in the company and see what the company's about, then you really don't know. But you're basically making your best educated guess whenever you accept an offer to a company anyway. And you really won't know until you start working for that company. But, obviously in the civilian world, it's a little different than military. You didn't sign a contract for 4 years, and, you do have the availability to change roles, which
Yeah.
so far I've been very lucky not to, but a lot of my buddies have already shifted within their first 1 to 2 years, a couple of different companies, and still looking for the right home. So it's always a process.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you brought up kind of a thought process, man, because you brought up, obviously the turn rate. And we actually just had a conversation during our morning meeting here at Seven Eagle Group about turn rate, because we've had folks come on from big box companies, and we actually looked up their turnover rate, and it's 150%, right, of their hourly workforce is turned over every 8 months. And it's something that, we don't necessarily think about when we're looking at opportunities and careers and stuff like that is a company's turn rate of their employees and how quickly maybe they get burned out and they have to replace them every 8 months, which was shocking to me. So that's something I've never thought about, me personally, when I'm looking at a company is how fast do people stay on and leave and have to replace those individuals at their company. So that's a huge thing maybe for those folks looking at these larger companies as well. Yeah.
Right. And one thing, like just for the warehouse side of it too, like, so I do have temporary employees here that are just temps. So that percentage turnover that I was talking about are actually those, excuse me, the temporary employees that actually become FST, actual employee owners, as we call ourselves. That turnover obviously at the temp is obviously a lot higher
Right.
because, like I said, you do work in a warehouse, it's forklifts, your pallet unit, case picking, different orders and things of that nature. So, different things to that nature, obviously require a different set. And then obviously with customers and different, peak levels through holidays, all those different things that, warehousing deals with, obviously those play a factor in it as well, where you have to bring on temporary labor to finish projects. And then, obviously you have the core group that stays there.
Yeah. Well, so we have a large number of individuals that have the skill sets and experience in the logistics field, right? Whether they're Army, Navy, Air Force. And I want to speak directly to them, give an opportunity to kind of pour into them for a moment, given your experience now in as a director of warehousing for FST, what's something that they can, from the service that they have and the experience and expertise that they have from the military side, what is one of the best ways that they can kind of convey that experience to the civilian counterpart or civilian career?
I would say if they're looking logistics and those types of opportunities, then if they've already worked within the military logistics and things like that, I mean their roles already kind of translate into different positions depending on what they've done within their logistics roles, whether that's customer service or a shipping and receiving or a dispatch, or even driving forklifts for pallets, any type of cargo operations, those type of things go just make directly with warehousing. And obviously as we shift into AI and automation and all those things, if you have a leg up, or if you've used some of that military stuff that's a little, that you've tried innovative stuff within that world, that's another thing to call out. But I mean, really, you're really looking at obviously Amazon and some of the bigger, warehousing industries. Like we're a 3PL, so it's a third party logistics, which means we take in the customer's product, we store it, and then we pick it and ship it out to their customers for that on time delivery, and making sure that our inventory is correct and we're not making mistakes, damages, expirations, things like that. Most of that is kind of almost the same thing within the warehousing and the military, shelf lives and things like that. So it all really equates to the same. It's just, you want to know what company, and you want to look at what type of, obviously as a veteran, they do have different military veterans programs that go into some of the bigger type things. But if they're looking, in major cities, obviously DC based, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio is a big one. Dallas, Fort Worth is a big one. There are a lot of warehouse jobs available. It's just a matter of, you may have to get in a little lower than what you may be thinking, and then work yourself back up within a leadership role from, everything that we've already done within the military. When you start a new job, it's kind of the same thing applies for, I think, for like the logistics and then the supply chain. I mean, and if you do have some of those, if you have a degree in those things like that, then you can look into, obviously the different things within a corporate base for the actual warehouses, and not maybe not at the operations level, but maybe above that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And one last thing before Daniel, I'm calling you to ask your question. You mentioned that FST is an employee owned
Mhm.
organization, business, and stuff like that. What is entailed in that? What does that look like? On to our perspective, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things to be employee owned organization and run?
Okay, so basically, and I'll kind of preface it. So basically, within a certain time frame, you get a certain portion of the company through shares or the value of the shares, and then per a certain amount of time, those shares vest, and then once they vest, once you leave the company, the company will pay you out those vested shares at whatever value they are, depending on when you actually what the share price was when you got it versus what the share price is when you leave. So obviously different companies, and the best example provided would be like you get into a company that's $10 to $20 a share, and then you work 10 to 20 years, possibly after you got out of the military, and then that share has gone from $5 to let's just ballpark at $300 a share, and you've been working there for 20 years and getting those percentage of shares, and then they would have to pay you out once you get out. So it's kind of not necessarily the 401k style, but it's kind of like that, but it's vested within the company, and it's directly related to how the company's share price goes.
And since the employees are kind of the shareholder, since the employees are the shareholders of the company, does that add value to every individual employee's voice to the direction of the company?
It does. So within this company, very transparent, town halls, all the things that, I've experienced with it. Yes, the CEO and down, very transparent with what's going on in the company. They will tell you when things are going wrong. They'll tell you when things are going good. Everybody has a voice, and that was another kind of key thing about the company that kind of led me is, there was no, you can kind of tell when people are pulling your leg. And if you've been in the military long enough, you've learned to kind of spot that
Yeah.
from a mile away. So use that as well. You can't have good gut checks on whatever industry that you go in, or when you go and visit different employees, and you know what they're actually about. And then obviously I got to go to the company and see what they were about, which even just made it even better for me, just seeing it up close and personal, because you want to trust and verify when you're making those life choices, or as you move on to your next thing.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Daniel. I see your hand raised.
All right, perfect. Hey, how are you doing, Sean?
How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know you said this was your first time, but you're a natural, so you can't tell it all. So, but one thing that often gets brought up here in these conversations is culture, and whether, hey, folks did 10, 20 years, whatever their situation is. For me personally, that's a huge part of the next chapter for me, is making sure that there's a right fit. So, I guess a double question here, but first, it's just going to start off like with your role specifically. How do you reach out for those motivational levels? So I hear there's a lot of employee owned, so that could financially drive some folks, but I guess in that leadership position, sometimes you get the folks that are just going to show up and do their job. And honestly, we need those. We need those people. And there's nothing wrong with it. But how do you try to take folks to the next level? And then the second part would be just, how invested is the company into the culture, and building that up as well?
Okay. Great questions. So first off, just for the motivation. So yes, you are going to have some employees that just want to come and do their job, and we appreciate those workers. They're just as hard as everybody else, and they enjoy where they're at. I mean, there are some people within the company that have been floor workers for over 20 years that show up every day and love it. Some of with the employee-based companies, some of them, their family even works for the company as well, which is, obviously a really great thing if you actually can, work with your family at the company as well. As far as my position in looking at the motivation, it's the same thing we do in the military. So specifically with this company, one of their pillars is community. So they actively look like this community actually gives you a couple of days, multiple, like 16 hours of community service that you can go off and be paid to go do community service for whatever you want to go do, whether that's a veterans organization or, a cancer ride or something like that. Even when I was doing the research on this company, they had done Pelotonia, some cancer research stuff, and they were always giving back to the community, which, obviously if they're doing that, that's something that, you want to look for if culture is a big thing. And that the fact that they're actually giving time off for you to go and do things, and it can be whatever, organization that you choose, which I thought was a really great thing. Another thing for me is, obviously here is as operations continue on and we're doing really well, we obviously, you want to give back to the employees there. Well, they do like they call it FST fests and things like that, where it's kind of like in the military. It's like we did dunk tanks, put the COO in a dunk tank and do donations, and little events here and there that we would look to do, obviously with Christmas parties, and the same corporate stuff still translates from the military. So again, it's doing the research and looking to see is if they promote it, are they doing it? And that's and you can usually find that within the company website or within any of the causes that they say that they do. So the research really helps with that. And then obviously the verification. And my biggest thing was, when you were looking at that culture, like those kind of pillars of excellence, which for my company, obviously, pillars are, partnering employees, the company, and then obviously community. So make sure you're looking, obviously with the military, we all do the mission statements and things of that nature. Look to see what their mission and vision is for the company, and if it kind of aligns to what you think it is. I think that's a good starting point. And then any interview that you get, make sure you're asking those questions. Don't just get asked questions. Make sure that you have some very good pointed questions back to them if it's something that is, true to what you're looking for, because they'll be honest with you. I don't, unless they try to just, blow smoke. But again, you'll call that out. You can notice hesitation. You can notice things like that. There were a couple of companies that I interviewed with where I could kind of just didn't get a good gut feeling about it. And you just want to trust your gut on those types of calls. Does that answer your question?
Daniel, you there? I think, yeah, no, great question. Great. Appreciate that response as well.
No, it was perfect. So yeah, thank you. You talked about the events, the 16 hours that were given to you and the folks in the company, the organization, to really get out there and find those things. So yeah, absolutely 100%. So I appreciate your time, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Go ahead, Keaton. Did you have a question? You had your hand raised. I didn't know if you still had that question.
Oh, sorry. I had myself muted. I forgot to unmute. I wanted to piggyback also and say thank you, Sean, for taking the time to speak to us. As a startup and kind of leading the, opening a new warehouse out in the Dallas area, a lot of people, this is my second week of connections, and I've heard a lot of people ask, what are things that you look for on resumes and interviews? One of my favorite quotes is the climate of an organization is set by the lowest quality performance a leader's willing to accept. What are some red flags? You talk about culture being huge, and not just for us looking for a company to work for, but I'm sure it's huge when you're looking at hiring somebody too and seeing if they're going to be a good fit. What are some red flags that, whether it's on resumes or interviews, what's something that you've seen that you're like, this is not something that we want in our company? I'm sure there's some very obvious answers, but if there's something that maybe people don't realize is something that we just shouldn't say, especially coming from a military background, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally get it. It's a great question. So when I was doing interviews for this company with my executive vice president, there were a couple things like, so for some people, like preparation's everything, right? Appearance is everything. How you project yourself in anything. So I still did the suit for every interview, regardless of what industry it was, so that and made sure I was cleaned up and in the proper proper uniform, I'd call it. So also is having those questions ready for you, and then being prepared, and like you want to think about all those things. Like most of us have instructed somebody in the military, so you have kind of those instructor skills already inherent in what you've done. Yeah, saw those things. Yeah, definitely. Turning your camera on. So if you don't show yourself in an interview, that's kind of a red flag too. I took a couple interviews from people in cars on their breaks, and I was willing to kind of get a little sense of that, because I didn't know if they were at another job and they're trying to get out of that job into another job. So that one I kind of took with a grain of salt. You're really looking for how they respond to your questions, and if obviously, sometimes if they can even give you like a coherent answer to a very basic question. Sure. Are they looking all over the place? Are they, it's kind of like body things, right? To see if they were well prepared, and if, they could speak intelligently about, certain little questions. And those red flags they pop up automatically. You'll see it. Obviously addressing, I think one guy called my executive vice president bro. So like, those type of things. So there's all sorts of things that, kind of come up in those interviews, and you kind of shake your head and you're just like, really, what was that? But, it does come across for sure.
That answers it perfectly. Thanks, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
So when your executive vice president was called bro, did that end that interview right there?
No, we continued on it, and we laughed about it afterwards.
And that's great, because now you have stories to tell us on, kind of the do's and don'ts. Obviously, hopefully everybody on this call understands don't do that during an interview process for sure. But yeah, if you have a question for Sean, kind of pick his brain, ask him some questions, please click the raise your hand button, and I'll give you a chance to ask your question. But I greatly appreciate you being here, Sean, and kind of delivering that message and talking about your experience, because obviously yours is very recent, very relevant to the transition that everybody here on this call is about to go through, that is going through. I guess one of the things that we don't talk about too, some of our folks that are recent out of the military, obviously when you got out, you had to plan for the VA process and get that all sorted out, and kind of be flexible in your job search, and obviously with the VA schedule and stuff like that. What was the best way that you've navigated that that VA process into a career, and so that everything's taken care of on your end for military?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I wrote in my notes, and I'm going to read it just because as I was prepping and kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about, if this kind of question came up, or if I was going to be off the cuff for a little bit longer, as long as Matt kept me on a leash. But I would say, and I even wrote it, I said, the transition from the military, whether you completed a year or 32 like myself, is probably the most stressful, scary, and frustrating, complex experience that I think I've ever had. And I'm a bomb tech, so I'm used to some stressful situations. But, the biggest thing was, like we talked about, they don't really give you the roadmap to it. You kind of got to figure it out yourself. So starting early was probably the best thing. I don't think I started early enough. I only started about a year out, and that was very rushed. Obviously, I moved from Virginia to Texas. I moved the VA system. Everybody knows that. I'm not going to stomp up and down on it again. But all your medical paperwork, your disability claims, trying to get those done before you can actually transition, because they kind of technically own you until you get those C&P exams completed, and they don't do it within the 45 days that they said they were going to do it. So that was frustrating, because that kind of put some things on hold as far as planning. And then biggest thing is that if you're moving, it's your last military move. So it was a little easier for me because I had a location. I think it would be harder if you didn't. But then again, being able to relocate to a company, if you're able to relocate, that's another thing. Ask for the relocation balance, bonuses and things like that. Just because the military is moving you doesn't mean you can't ask that company for a relocation bonus, things to that nature. Be willing to negotiate a little bit if you're really, really want that job. And don't settle, because there's a ton of companies out there. So you'll find something. So don't feel like you have to be rushed. You're more rushed with the military process and making sure that you get all the documentation in on time and you have everything, scanned and set up. Because I had 2 dogs, 2 cats, special needs daughter that I moved with. I had the full gambit, and I was expecting the wheels to fall off very quickly if something went off the rails. And a couple things did with the house I was selling versus the house that was built. So I was always able to kind of pivot a little bit. And, that was a great thing about being in the military, is it doesn't always go as planned. So I was kind of used to that a little bit. So I was able to kind of hinge on some friends and, other experiences to help me, kind of through that transition, which, it doesn't go as well as you always think it will, but, try to think of those things in advance of what's going to really, set me off, and what's a good backup plan if I need it. And that kind of really helped me out a little bit. And then, it's really connections. It's keeping connections with the people that you work with, and, to some of those people in the area that you're going to move into. If those people, that'll obviously, the more connections you have, the better. And I liked, somebody said the other day, don't think of it as a connection, think of it as a relationship. And, just like with any relationship, you want to be honest and truthful. And if you say you're going to call somebody back, call them back. If you say you're going to send them an email back. And then if you don't hear from somebody within a week, send them a quick voicemail or a quick email, just to start the conversation back up. Because like I said, there are a lot of people that are busy and have a lot of things going on, just like we do. But it's just sometimes it's that simple follow up that could put you in the right communication or have them pass you off to somebody else. So you just have to stay engaged and make a plan. I think I put in there that I was going to try to talk to at least 5 to 7 people a week, and continue to follow up with them until I got something. And then, thank them for their time when they were done with it. If there's anything else I could do for them, and try to build those relationships, which I think kind of help you, because this thing kind of fell in my lap by kind of accident, but it was a connection. Like I said, it was a connection to a guy that I had known that knew I was moving here and knew that kind of what I was looking for. And that kind of set me in motion.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Robert.
So I have an interview after this. So I was just going to ask the question, is there any kind of advice you give someone who's about to go into an interview?
No, just relax and relax, be yourself. And, my biggest thing was being honest with them. Like the questions that I had, even when I had the panel of the president of the company, I had the chief admin officer, the executive vice president of warehousing. I had like a 4-way interview, as my second, kind of round of interviews. And, they all ask great questions. They all ask different things. Biggest thing is just to take your time. You don't have to answer right off the bat. Kind of think about the question, write it down, or, take a quick pause to think about what they're kind of asking. And if you don't know, then, just take a quick smile and say, hey, like, repeat the question, please. And, get into it and just be yourself. Just try to be relaxed. I know it's hard. And especially if it's a role that you really, really, really want, that can breed a little bit of, nervousness, naturally anyway, but, just present your best self and, get after it.
Thank you.
No, good question. Hey, and also, Robert, good luck on that interview, man. I wish you the best. So, but no, Sean, thank you so much for your time today. Like I said, coming into and mentoring our students and giving those keen insights on your transition, kind of what worked for you and what you've done. So because it's so relevant and so recent, it definitely provides a lot of good insights on what the next steps for our students are going to be to help them out in their course of action. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Yeah, anytime. No, I appreciate it, and good luck to everybody. And if there's anything I can do, just please hit me on my LinkedIn. I'll get to you when I can. And if you need anything or need any other questions answered, or like I said, I'm always willing to help, and kind of love paying it forward to everybody else. Because like I said, it's a tough thing to do. We all can do it. We all have the tools and the means. So I appreciate all of you, and good luck to everybody in their transition.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. You have a fantastic day.
All right, you too. Everybody take care.
All right, guys. No, that was a great presentation. If you are interested in like that logistics field, continue on, I highly encourage you to reach out to them, right? Obviously,